delighted, ready to go.
It's not 5 o'clock, and they don't care. Welcome to Wine to 5. Entertainment, education, and everyday drinking for everyday people. Your hosts are Valerie Caruso and Stephanie Davis, two wine educators who don't need a clock to know when to pour that next glass.
All right. Well, we are so excited this week. We are going to introduce our guest and co-host for today before we all get a little bit saucy. And Skyping with us from the UK is Joe Fattorini. How you doing, Joe?
Hello, I'm very well indeed. I'm sparkling form. I've now recovered from appalling jet lag because I've been traveling a great deal with our show for Series 2, but I'm now recovered, so I'm back on good form. If you'd asked me a couple of days ago, I would have been rather glum and gloomy.
Oh my God.
And Joe, are you back at home now?
Yeah, I am. Just sort of briefly, we sort of film everything in a slightly unusual sequence. I think it's standard with most TV shows. But for about 3 or 4 months, I just don't come home at all, really. In April, I was at home 3 times, but it was for less than 24 hours across all 3. So I would just sort of come and literally go to bed for 3 or 4 hours and then sort of fly off again somewhere else, the other side of the world. We were in Japan most recently, and for people in the UK, Japanese jet lag is sort of utterly ghastly. I'm sure it is pretty ghastly in much of the United States too. So it was great fun going there, but for about 3 days I've been walking into walls and being very, very grumpy with people in shops. And of course they don't get that I haven't really slept very much for a long time. But no, back at home and quite looking forward to, this is the first night I've had a glass of wine for a while because I was just too tired the last 2 or 3 nights.
And for those listeners, when he's talking about filming, we are so fortunate that Joe is spending a little time with us today because Joe is one of the hosts of the Wine Show TV, and you can get that on Hulu. And just a little bit about Joe. He's got decades of experience in wine retail, wine writing, including writing the very first textbook, I believe, on wine marketing to restaurants.
It was.
Yeah, that was like 20 years ago.
Crikey, a very long time ago. I'm much older than I look. When people go on, I'm an old man, but wine keeps you very young. So it's a bit like moisturizer.
It does. And I did get to meet Joe back in January at the WSET graduation. I met your lovely fiancée, Christina.
Yes, she's just next door. She's waiting. She's sort of going and doing the starter and the pudding, and then I shall. I'm cooking. Actually, I'm cooking. Have you ever heard of Juan Marie Arzac, the great 3-star Michelin chef? And just a couple of months ago, he taught me this amazing Basque dish made with hake. So I'm going to cook some hake a bit later on.
That sounds fabulous.
And so you can tell that we're dealing with a man who's got great worldly experiences, and I will bet he has some excellent stories. You also need to know that the reason he was at the WSET graduation is because he was a nominee for Outstanding Alumni Award for the Wine Spirit Education Trust. No, do keep going. Do keep going. Yeah, and it's funny because Jancis Robinson nominated you, correct? Is that how that works?
It was, yeah, absolutely. It was the first time. Jancis is the sponsor of the outstanding graduate, outstanding alumnus of the WSET diploma, and this was the first time. So it was particularly nice to be nominated for the first time. And we had this. There were 5 people, 5 nominations, and it was a really august panel. And then we suddenly realized that of the 5 nominees, 3 of us were all people who'd been on the wine show, the TV show. So there was me, and a great sommelier from Shanghai, a guy called Yang Lu, who's brilliant fun. We really enjoyed filming with him, and an American lady, Maureen Downey,
yes,
who has done a great deal of work in going and hunting down wine fraudsters. So this was the 3 of us, and the 3 of us all knew each other. So we were all going, oh no, it'll definitely be you. It'll be definitely you. It'll definitely be you. And then it was Isabel Legeron, which we actually all said, no, it was definitely always going to be Isabel because she's utterly brilliant and a great sort of natural wine advocate and sort of pioneer. So we were just utterly delighted to be shortlisted, to be honest. It was great fun.
Congratulations on that. And also the winner of the International Wine Spirits Competitions was a 2017 Wine Writer Award.
Wine Communicator of the Year of the IWSC. And I have to tell you, it's the greatest award to win because you win it twice, which is great fun. I mean, you only win it once, but it's sponsored by Vinitaly. And the prize is to go to Vinitaly to collect the award. Nice. So Christina, my fiancée, and I, we trundled across, and honestly, it was amazing. I was just like a kid the whole time, because I'm not very good at winning awards, because I come to celebrity and being celebrated in very much late in life. And they give you the award in the arena, the Roman amphitheatre in the middle of Verona,
Right.
and they put a sort of glass marquee up in the middle. And I went up on stage and collected this award in a chaotic Italian dinner, which made it even more entertaining. So you're in this sort of Roman amphitheatre, and there's Italian chaos happening everywhere, and people talking and so on, and you get this enormous prize. But they give you this huge sort of vase. It's very, very ornate. And then as you walk off stage, a rather brusque Italian lady marches up and whisks it off you. And you say, oh, that was mine. She said, no, you're not allowed to have it until November, when you get given it a second time at the Guildhall, which is a sort of similarly august environment in London, where they give everybody else their prizes. So it's quite good fun to go and get it 2 times round. And then when I was there, yes, I kept meeting all these rather sort of elderly men and a couple of women. And it suddenly turned out that every agriculture minister in Europe was there in the audience, except for Britain's, because, of course, Britain is leaving the European Union, and ours haven't been invited because we're persona non grata in Europe at the moment. Oh, no. So you realise it's a terribly serious audience. So fortunately, I didn't have to give a speech, or I'd have said bum or something, and people would have been awfully upset.
Well, like I said, we could just go on. The list of accomplishments is far longer than we have time for today. But did I forget to add anything significant that you would like to add that maybe our listeners would like to know?
I'm only going to tell you this. It's very silly. We were travelling away with our crew, and they bring me down to earth. Well, I don't need much of it, because I hopefully have I'm a Yorkshireman, and you don't ever need to ask a Yorkshireman if he comes from Yorkshire, because we'll usually tell you within about 3 minutes. I'm slightly on about 5 so far, so it's a bit behind time. And we're famously down to earth sort of people from the north of England. But the crew were sort of joshing about how I was such a celebrity, and then I mentioned nothing, and about halfway through dinner, I mentioned something about being. Somebody said, "Well, you've got some influence, haven't you, Joe?" And I said, "Well, I am the 22nd most influential person in wine in the UK." And they all then got very cross, because we thought we weren't going to mention that. So this is my latest one. It's nice. It is arguably the most ridiculous award I've ever had, because Jancis, who is globally famous and moves markets with her mere words, is, I think, about 35. So I think it's utterly ridiculous that I think I was 13 places higher than her. But it's very nice when people do say you are influential in the world of wine, but I don't feel it is entirely justified. I think maybe the man just liked me that day.
I'm still excited that Joe, as the 22nd most influential wine person in the UK, that you're here with us today, and you're going to tell us about what you're drinking. So let's dive into our drinks.
Well, I am very excited about what I'm drinking. Have you had Pais?
No.
I'm having a Pais. It's really good, and this is the next big thing from South America. Yeah. This is made by a company called the Garage Wine Company. This is right. This is what I meant to be telling you, isn't it? This is made by the Garage Wine Company. It's a friend of mine called Derek Mossman-Knapp, and he's sort of. Well, he's mad. He's a Canadian ski instructor who comes and stays with me for very long periods of time, and I love Derek to bits. But it does mean that you have a very large Canadian at your dinner table at about 2:00 in the morning, having a very in-depth discussion about the state of the Chilean wine industry. And then you get up the next morning with a hangover, and you find that you've got a very large Canadian in his pants at your breakfast table, having a fairly lengthy discussion about the Chilean wine industry. And he's doing lots of interesting stuff with Pais, which is known as Mission sometimes.
Yeah.
I was going to say, that's a very old grape for that region.
And it's pink. And these huge bunches of slightly pink grapes. But Chile's decided to make interesting stuff with it. And a couple of ones to really look out for. There's one called Estelado Pais, and it's made by Torres, and it's a sparkling Pais from Chile.
Wow.
And it is the best sparkling wine out of the whole of Chile. I see this without a shadow of a doubt, not because I decided it, but because the World Champagne and Sparkling Wine World Championships said it was the greatest sparkling wine in Chile. But it's really, really good. And so they're making this slightly partridge-eye tinged, you use that term, partridge-eye? Sort of slightly.
Yes.
And so it's really super fizz. And Derek discovered these, lots of people had really interesting ancient vines with Pais. And what had been doing was helping people graft particularly Carignan onto vines. Sometimes Carignan, a bit of Sanso. I think there's a little bit of Cabernet that he would graft onto very old Pais vines. But with a few guys, he said, I'm going to make something interesting. And up to now, he's made wine in lots. So he'll go and bring in different sort of bits from here, there, and wherever. Now he makes single ferments. So he says this is one ferment, and so sometimes it might be a single vineyard, sometimes it might be 2 or 3 vineyards, and he makes one big ferment of Pais, and it's great fun stuff. You can have it cool because it's very low. That's why I'm drinking it now. It's starting to get summery and a slightly chilled red because it's got very low tannins because it's a kind of pink grape really. And so I am enjoying Garage Wine Company Pais. Great fun stuff.
Can you send us a picture of your?
I can do, yeah, absolutely. I have to because the label's so cool. It's got these really cool sort of hand-drawn labels. He stayed with me a few weeks ago, did Derek?
That's awesome. Well, let's finish up what we're drinking, and then we'll move on and hear more stories. This is incredible.
So yeah, that's what I've got just in front of me right now. Do you want other things? What else?
No, I think that's fine. I mean, unless there's something else you wanna tell us about.
Pais is interesting. Soft, ripe fruits. So these are lightweight fruits. It's really interesting wine.
Sounds delicious. I can't wait to try it because I've read about it, have never had one, so that's pretty awesome.
That's on our wino radar now for sure.
It's on the wino radar, and I think he just provided the factoid as well.
I think so.
Yeah.
Val, what are you drinking, girl?
I have got this Código. It's the 1530 tequila. This is the Reposado. I was really trying to get my hands on the Extra Añejo, the Origen. Couldn't find it, but this one's good in cocktails. I'm sipping it on its own right now, just for a little geeky fun fact for our listeners. Reposado tequila, we don't do shots with it so much. We do like to sip it or make cocktails. Has to be aged at least 2 months in oak. The one I'm sipping on has been aging for 6 months in oak. Añejo has to be aged a minimum of a year. Those are the ones I really like to sip on. An Extra Añejo at least 3 years. So those aged tequilas, again, we don't shoot them. We don't even really mix those in too many margaritas. We kind of sip on them like a cognac or a whiskey. And I don't know if a lot of people think of tequila that way, but it is kind of an interesting way to think about it. So that's what I'm sipping right now in the middle of the day here on Wednesday. And I got to ask Steph, what in heaven's name you're sipping up there in northern Colorado? And oh, by the way, soon to be home to Johnny Depp, who is sick of the LA grind. He's going to be your neighbor soon.
I can't believe this, the Johnny Depp thing. And especially, right, because I've heard that he's into wine. So I definitely will probably either run into him or maybe he will find my Wine with Lunch group and he'll be like, excuse me, can I join your private wine group? I'll be like, oh, let me think about it.
Well, apparently he spends about $30,000 a month on wine, so maybe we can get him on the show. Yeah, the dude's got a killer wine budget, so I'm expecting Steph to run into this dude up in there at grocery liquor, supermarket liquors.
Yes, I've got to tell him to go shop at supermarket liquors and get hooked up with Adam for sure.
Yeah, Adam, be on the lookout for Johnny Depp, and if you see him, give him Steph's card so we can get him on the show and find out what he's drinking. But Steph, tell us more about what you're drinking up there.
Well, I am still on the kick from our last show when we talked about New Age wines. That's the name, New Age, from Argentina. They're from the Bianchi family. And so I made a cocktail called Mark's Sexy Cocktail with the New Age white, and it has 1 ounce of gin. I did use the Magellan gin, and 1 ounce of the New Age white wine, 1/2 ounce of fresh squeezed lemon juice, 1/2 ounce of elderflower liqueur, and 1/4 ounce of simple syrup. And I found the scrappy. Ooh, who's that?
That's Dino.
Dog is that?
It's my Swedish-speaking Dachshund.
Oh
my God! A couple of cute barks from a dachshund and a couple of dashes of grapefruit bitters. But this is a wonderful cocktail. I've served it up, but it would also be good on the rocks too. But yeah, so another fun way to use wine in a cocktail, and it's not a champagne cocktail, you know?
Yeah.
I do apologize. There's dog barking in the background.
You know what, Joe? Our first guest ever on the podcast was a dog.
Eisen was my Weimaraner that we used to have. So he's no longer with us, but he was our first guest.
So that's just fine.
They have a very discerning palate, you know. And I'm sure he'd enjoy that cocktail. Because my fiance, she works with champagne, so anything that's got some fizz in it, that's we're straight in for that. That sounds absolutely delicious. Elderflower liqueur is so fashionable right now. People absolutely loving doing interesting things with it. That sort of bright, vibrant character.
It is very popular, for sure. Well, you know what else is very popular is your wine show TV, and that's what we're so dying to talk to you about. And I definitely want to hear more, you know, about what's in store for season 2 and some of the history on how did the show get started and at what point did you get involved?
Well, and for season 2, because there's no great secrets, we always make out. We always like, oh, we can't possibly tell you. And then somebody goes, yeah, but I could look at your Instagram feed and it immediately tells me exactly what you're getting. Because the minute I arrive somewhere. This series, it's a slightly shorter series this time because we wanted to get it made and get out because we get lots of fantastic feedback. We had a really lovely thing. There's a website called The Vulture, and the guy said that we were the most interactive show on TV because I just respond endlessly to tweets in the middle of the night. I sort of sit there furiously going and responding to people. And so we wanted to get the show out to people. So we have been to Munich in Germany. I've just come back from Japan. We had this real flurry. We came to North America. We started in the Okanagan Valley in Canada, which is lovely most of the time, and we turned up when it was raining and kind of glum.
Darn.
So it was a very glum day where I'm kayaking on Lake Okanagan. Mendocino County, which was fascinating, particularly there's a great sheriff there who kind of lends people some of his villains. Some of his, I shouldn't call them villains, they're reformed, they're his prisoners. So there are these guys who are serving sentences, they're towards the end of their sentences, and they are working in vineyards to sort of get them back into the workplace. And they were really fascinating guys, and none of them had worked in vineyards before. They were just enjoying learning about it. We had a great day with them. A bit of time in Santa Cruz. I'd never really sort of been around Santa Barbara, Santa Cruz, and Santa Ynez Valley. So I did a bit of a road trip with a lady called Gina Yashari, who is a British-born comedian who now she used to live in LA. And there is a kind of quirky twist because it turned out that it wasn't just wine we were doing. There was a bit of comedy, and she was the one who was performing. The tables turned. So I now have I spent I did up in the middle of the night. I didn't sleep for 36 hours trying to write topical American wine jokes about the American political system, which is a bit of a tall order. But it turned out I had 2 or 3 quite good ones up my sleeve, and I got a cheer. I was really chuffed. Nice. Was it Georgia, but not the United States Georgia, the original one?
Yeah.
Is the most fascinating place. Honestly, if you are listening, well, of course you're listening. You who are listening, try and find a way to go to Tbilisi in Georgia. And particularly before, I know it sounds awful, but that sort of thing, before it gets spoiled by lots of people like us turning up to Tbilisi in Georgia. It's the home of winemaking. I mean, arguably, they have these great pips that are 8,000 years old. And so we believe that is, as far back as we can go to find out where wine was made. And they still make wine in these, if you had wine from a qvevri.
Yes,
yes, we have. Yeah.
I get into a qvevri is even more fun because they're huge.
Was it more fun than the barrel that you were trapped in France?
Yeah, yes, because they didn't seal the qvevri, so I was able to climb out. It's really weird. You go down this little ladder and sort of get in the qvevri, and they're huge as well. You can stand up in a qvevri because it's about 10, 12 feet high. And so I clambered into its qvevri, and there's this lovely wine. This an American guy actually, John Werdeman, who makes wine at a winery called Pheasant's Tears. Quite a celebrated.
Yes.
Yeah, great wine. And John Werdeman, who is this big cuddly teddy bear of a man with his big beard, and we hugged a lot and sang, and we did lots of toasting, and so you become completely consumed with it. And he gave me a wine, and I said, being Mr. sort of wine nerd, and I said, I got my pad out, said, would you mind telling me what the blend of grapes is in this? And he said, well, I can, but it'll take a while. And I said, why? Because it's got 416 different grape varieties in this wine.
No.
And they're all native Georgian varieties, and he puts them all in a big qvevri and just kind of leaves them to it. And so you get this. I mean, it's a cross between an orange or what they prefer to call amber wines. They're amber, not orange. So amber wines, but it's a sort of more dark-hued one. And so some of them are red, and some of them are white, and some of them are pink, and they sit for 9 months on skins. And it's called Polyphony. Is the wine, and it's brilliant. He doesn't make very much of it. So Georgia was really great, and you get this still slightly post-communist feel. It's in fact I just saw it 10 minutes ago before I came online with you guys. I was looking at my wine rack, and I got a bottle of wine that's in the shape of Stalin, which rates as the second worst taste item I collected on this series of the wine show. I may tell you about the worst taste item, but the Stalin bottle was the worst. It was the second worst taste. And there are still people who kind of, I don't know if you say revere Stalin, but there is still a kind of because he was Georgian, there is still if you like, a respect for Stalin in parts of Georgia. So you do get this slightly odd kind of feel, but at the same time, the food is fabulous. There's Alice Faring's book, which if anybody's ever read, is it called For the Love of Wine? Where she about
there's the Naked Wine, and then there's the one that she wrote about Parker.
Yes,
is that the one where she got in the fight with Parker? I think yeah.
It's about these people that she goes and discovers, and she learns about going to Georgia, and she sort of really loves it. So I would recommend going to Georgia for anyone. That was we went to Bosnia, which is the home of the worst taste item that I bought on this trip. Bosnia was a fascinating story of how wine is. There's a winery we visited which is bringing together the warring parties from 92, 93. Wow. And traveling around Bosnia is a deeply sort of humbling and sobering experience. These enormous graveyards from particularly 92 and 93. And our drivers, two great guys who are roughly my age. I'm 47, so they're kind of my age. They had both fought in the war. And so they say it's kind of weird because you're in Sarajevo and you chat away with somebody and you work with him for a couple of months, and then you're sitting having a drink one night, and then you suddenly realize, I was probably shooting a rifle at you in the early 90s. And said that's still very kind of real and quite raw. And of course, you travel through the Bosniak part of Bosnia and then into Republika Srpska, which is broadly sort of Serbian, and then the sort of Croatian parts and so on. But we went to a monastery. This is kind of dark story, but this is the things that surprise you. I just thought it was all going to be really happy and we would meet all these lovely people, which we did, who are making wine in a former battlefield. And it is genuinely a former battlefield, because as we were traveling through this vineyard, I was kicking at something on the floor. And this guy said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm just something down here." And I'm like kicking at it. He goes, "Don't do that. Stop it." I said, "Why?" It's just something. And he said, "This place used to be a minefield."
Wow.
I'm like, cleared this. He said, you just don't have, and it turned out it was a mess tin, like a canteen, sort of, and it had been ploughed into the soil 20 odd years earlier, 25 years ago, and it had just, this year's ploughing had sort of brought it to the surface. We found this sort of mess tin, and it's going to brought it home to you. But a couple of days later, I was all full of, this is lovely. We've got this amazing story. Here are Croats and Bosniaks and Serbian, ethnic people all making wine together. And the wines are great. The whites are really good. The reds need a bit of work, but the white was fabulous. And we went to a monastery where they sell wine in Republika Srpska. And it's famous because everybody there is really tall. And it's where all Serbian basketball players come from, because everybody is hugely tall. And I suddenly felt like I was in Gulliver's Travels. I was there, this Lilliputian man wandering around with all these huge people. They were really sweet. And on the way out, this guy said, you should, this monastery said, you should stop at our little gift shop. Here's some wine. We had some wine we could take away. He stop at the gift shop. He said, there's all these, little trinkets you can buy. And so I went and I was looking around, and I bought that's like a prayer bracelet thing that, I like to buy little odd things as I travel around, there's this little prayer bracelet, I have that. And then there was all these fridge magnets. I thought, I'll get a fridge magnet. It's a nice thing to go and have. And I looked at the fridge magnets, and there was one with a guy all in sort of camouflage fatigues. And I looked, and it looked kind of familiar. And I took it to the counter, and the guy spoke no English. He just said, yes. He said, Ratko Mladic. Good, he's good. And I'm thinking that's the same Ratko Mladic who is currently being tried at the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague for the massacre at Srebrenica. And I asked him, I said, who buys a Ratko Mladic fridge magnet? And he's Serbian school kids. So they love them.
Really?
And he's this kind of national hero. And we realized we thought we were going to film this kind of historic story, and it was resolved by this lovely kind of little wine thing at the end where we go, oh yeah, and here's a winery and it's rebuilding, and people are able to go and rebuild their buildings that were demolished 25 years ago. And then it sort of brought it home to me, this is not a dead story at all. It was a appalling use of word. This is not a story that's finished. This is still very live. Here are people who are still trying to create projects to stop, if you like, a new generation who forget the horrors of the war in the former Yugoslavia from going, oh, actually, you know what, he was a real dude and what he was doing was a good thing. And so sometimes, you do these stories thinking it's a flippity-gibbet, throwaway piece of ephemera, and you realize actually these stories are very, very real and sort of very live. And we've had quite a few sort of meaty stories. I mean, last series and this one, both of them have been, both series we've often gone for something where, you kind of get. We've looked at the issue of marijuana in California. And marijuana is causing major problems. The legalization of marijuana is causing major problems for viticulture in California.
Right, for the vineyard workers.
You can earn so much more money by going and working in marijuana than you can in making wine. So those things have been very interesting. We've also had some classics. I ran the Bordeaux Marathon. Oh, have you ever thought of doing that?
I'm doing that this September. How was it?
Don't ask me that because I'll put you on.
Oh no! How do I prepare for this? Do I need to be drinking and running?
You totally have to drink all your way around. I have one massive piece of advice. Don't wear a very big, heavy, fancy dress costume, which was the single most stupid thing I've ever done. I've done Ironman races.
What was your costume?
I went as Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Oh my gosh.
So somebody said, you can be Obi-Wan Kenobi. I was like, oh, good, I'll do this. I've done 3 Ironman races, so I'm not an unfit guy. And I've had pretty good times, Ironman racing. And I think 11 hours and a minute. So if anybody's listening, it's not terrible for a man in his mid-40s. So I was like, I'll be fine. I did loads of training. I was doing all my running. I felt kind of great. Anyway, I had this ridiculously huge Obi-Wan Kenobi costume on. I would have been warm in Siberia in the winter. And it was 28 degrees, 82, 83, 84 degrees, something like that. So we set off. I started getting a bit sweaty. By the time we got to Pichon-Longueville, I was dripping. And Pichon-Longueville is about 4 miles in. So we still have another 22 miles to go, and I was absolutely toasted. Anyway, we kind of carried on. They took my costume off me, and it weighed about 22, 23 pounds.
Oh, my gosh.
Took it off me about halfway around, and they said, are you okay? You need to get some liquid in. So I started taking on liquid on board. Anyway, it turns out that when you sweated that much out, you just can't get enough back in you. So I got right round. And also I was rehydrating fairly healthily at Mouton Rothschild. And it was a Feet Rothschild. I rehydrated somewhat liberally there with totally the wrong thing. So I did it on a diet of oysters, beef, claret, more oysters, beef and claret, and occasionally drinking water and having half a banana. And I got to the other end, and actually our director rang me up. He rang me today, and he said, I've just seen the edit of that film. And he just said, you look terrible. Oh, no. Anyway, I kind of held it together as we got across the line. This is what you won't see on camera. I got across the line, I looked sort of terrible. I ran it with this guy who'd run all the way from Vancouver to Buenos Aires, unsupported, pushing all his belongings in a pram. Amazing guy.
Oh my God.
Jamie Ramsey's called him.
Bionic.
Amazing guy. And he does lots of raising awareness now for servicemen, particularly servicemen and women who've come back from sort of modern wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, who have challenges around mental health. This is his big thing, is helping people address issues around mental health in retired service people. And so he'd run this thing, 364 days it took him to run from Vancouver. He crossed the Andes twice. So he's a pretty fit guy. He was running a marathon a day some of the time, and never less than like 10 miles. So he was fine. He kind of breezes across the line. I look utterly terrible. I kind of held it together for about 20 minutes, an hour or so. And then suddenly I said to the producer, I'm really, really bad. And she said, what do you mean? I said, I can't stop moving. She said, well, just have a sit down. I said, no, I can't, because if I stop, I will be screaming with cramps. So eventually they took me to the medical tent, and fortunately the cameramen had put their cameras away, because there then ensued, I mean, our series producer, a lady called Melanie Jappi, she is a genius. She's utterly brilliant. It was her idea. I'll tell you about her in a minute. But she's the one who made this whole thing happen, and she's the sort of brains of the operation. It's certainly not me. She was sitting there thinking, I've killed him. I'm writhing and I'm screaming, and my legs were just boiling with the muscles all sort of in terrible cramps, whilst this French fireman called Francis went and pummeled my legs. And there's this amazing doctor, I can't remember what she was called. She was a brilliant doctor with very firm thumbs, as they tried to sort of calm my legs down enough so they could get a drip in me to sort of rehydrate me with a drip. He said, there's no point in you drinking anything, it'll just go straight through you. What you need to do now is to do it on an IV. So yeah, and then 20 minutes later, I was right as rain. I'm fine. Going, oh no, it's fine. And they said, you do realize you were in a very, very bad way there, because you were so massively dehydrated. So yeah, don't make sure you have to kind of take your health quite seriously as you're going around. I didn't. I was like, yeah, this will be easy. It's just a marathon. And I was too hot and too sweaty. But you'll be fine.
Well, that's good advice. That's good advice. And I was surprised that we had to have a written permission from a physician that says that, we're capable of doing this run, even though everybody says it's just a fun run. And I'm already taking my training seriously, but I appreciate the advice on the costume, because my entire group of 10 people that are all coming from Fort Collins, we've all been talking about costumes, and we haven't landed yet on the costume. However, I have asked the iconic wines guy, Burke, to hook us up with some swag that says iconic wines. So maybe just something very simple, like a headband and a cape. That should be good.
Or a tutu.
Or tutu.
Tutus are the way forwards. There are quite kind of a lot of tutus. If you can wear running gear that's effectively ornamented, that's really good.
Okay.
The incorrect thing to do is to have an entire costume that makes you look like a medieval monk and try and do it.
Oh, Joe, you have a story for everything. This is great.
That is great. You know what? I bet you have a story for this most complained about article in Decanter history, because I have to say, I dug up your January 2017 piece about, why obsessing about millennials is a waste of time and how they're not special, they just have firmer thighs. I thought it was that one, but apparently there was one back in January of 2007, 10 years earlier. I'm curious, what inspired you to write that piece, and can you tell us a little bit about why it was so controversial?
I can. I mean, the context, very briefly, the context is helpful, because I learned as a writer in Scotland, and I lived in Scotland for 18 years, and I was a wine writer for the Herald newspaper, very august, well-known newspaper there. But one of the great things about working in Scotland is you are in a kind of little bubble, because Scotland has its although it's not an independent country yet, could well be, it has its own media, so it has its own broadcasting. So the BBC produces separate programming for people in Scotland, and independent TV does as well. And it has its own newspapers. So Scottish people tend not to read English papers, and vice versa. So you have this relatively small country, but it's got a very proud, great journalistic tradition. And I was taught to write by a great old sub. And he taught me, you know what, you got to go hard or go home. And he was a proper old school journalist, and we used to meet in the pub, and he would work in the pub, and we didn't go in the office. He would dictate it to a copy taker, and it was brilliant journalism, but we did it in that old school way. And so one of our first columns that we ever wrote, which was not the most complained about, was somebody gave us some really smart Bordeaux, and they said, we would like you to take this to a smart club and do a smart wine tasting with people with this great Bordeaux. And Tom said, yeah, we're not going to do that. I said, well, who should we, we should go to some local wine society. And he said, no, I got a much better idea. We're going to go to the Salvation Army hostel, and we're going to go and do a wine tasting with the homeless. And so we went with all these homeless dudes who were in the Salvation Army hostel, who were brilliant. They gave us these amazing tasting notes. So, and then, of course, people complained. They said, you shouldn't be giving wine to homeless people. Ethically, it was slightly unsound. But it made for a great topic. So I was writing, and I'd done a bit of work around organic viticulture, and I'd been actually in Alsace with a guy called Bruno Sorg. And Bruno, great winemaker in Alsace, these beautiful wines have little square orange labels, and he makes really lovely Alsace, mostly whites. I think he makes some Pinot. And we were talking about organic viticulture. Bear in mind, this is 10 years ago, and I think the debate has moved on a bit. But I said, I had this sort of skepticism about organics. And I kind of said, in the end, it just feels like an English aristocrat comes up with a fairly arbitrary date at which she says, you know what, before now, agricultural chemicals and practice is good. After now, it's kind of bad. And so she sort of roughly takes this point in the kind of 1930s, 1920s, and sort of says anything that was before now, copper sulfate and sulfur and so on, that's kind of fine. Anything after now is terrible. And that to me just sort of felt like, I slightly felt it was a bit superior, and we should listen to aristocrats. I have this sort of slightly Republican streak about me. So I wrote this piece and Bruno had come up with some quite interesting stuff. He said, there's a guy next to me who is an organic farmer. He said, Bruno said that when we have a lot of rain, which we do sometimes in Alsace, it is the driest wine region in France, but he said sometimes when we've got a lot of rain, I can go out and spray with a heavily tested systemic pesticide. I do it once. You know what? I'd rather not do it at all, but sometimes you have to. He said the guy next door to me will be making 7 or 8 passes with effectively Victorian pesticides, which can build up in the soil. He says he gets terrible soil compaction. He says he's using masses of diesel because he's got to go and drag through these very wet vineyards. He said, I'm not convinced that this is a good thing. So I wrote this piece saying, you know what, I kind of think a lot of this organic stuff is bunk. And I came up with, I was very adamant, I didn't come up with anything that was unsubstantiated. I just said, look, this is what I know to be true about some of these things. What people do get liver disease from too much copper sulfate. There are issues around some of the treatments that people are using. You know what? It's very easy to sort of say, I think that modern pesticides are terrible. Actually, they've been pretty heavily tested. They're not ideal, but it's not as though we're using Agent Orange on things all the time, So I came up with some stuff. I also pointed out that there are chemistry professors who will take a teaspoon of DDT and they'll eat it. And actually, yes, DDT is terrible for birds, but it's not necessarily horrendously harmful for people. And I was a bit naughty and I did some of it for effect. Decanter magazine pretty much had to hand over their letters page to correspondence about this for the next 2 months. And it was just bags and bags of people. And incredibly, it was roughly half and half. Half of the people were saying, thank goodness somebody said this. The other half of the people were saying, this is utterly terrible. And one of the things that Guy Woodward, who's no longer the editor, but he was very supportive at the time, he's still a very good friend, he wrote a sort of mini editorial, I think on month 3, where he said, look, I'm not going to publish any more of the correspondence around this. He said, I think we've rinsed it. But one point I will make, and he's a great, he works a lot with the Society of Editors, he said, as an editor and as a professional journalist, what I find most disturbing about the correspondence is that amongst the people who were opposed to Joe's arguments were a very large number of people who demanded censorship. And he said what has been most worrying about the debate was the number of people who said, I demand that you never, ever commission a piece by Joe ever again. He said, here's somebody who's written a piece that is factually correct. I mean, you might take issue with the slant I took, but he said he hasn't lied. He's voiced an opinion supported by facts. It wasn't just me saying, well, I think this. I was saying, I think this because X, Y, and Z. And he said it was a very worrying, and I still see this sometimes, I think, around the natural wine debates.
Yeah.
I think that there is a determined thing. I'm simply not listening to anybody who has an opposite viewpoint. And I particularly took the view, I said, most of the world's wine is not organic. And if we were to insist that everybody made organic wine, we would be certainly not condemning is the wrong word, but we would certainly be removing wine as a pleasure from very large numbers of, if you like, less well-off wine drinkers, wine lovers. And most of my career has been spent not in the world of fine wine. I love it when I meet wine journalists and they sort of, well, of course, I mostly focus on fine wine. And you go, oh, you idiot. because I started my wine career. I started in Epping in Essex, which is not a particularly highfalutin part of the world. I mean, I started out as a wholesaler selling wine in places like Paisley and Renfrew. I mean, if there was town top trumps and you got Paisley and Renfrew, you are doing very badly. They are not. They're interesting places, but they are not the most salubrious places in the world to live. And now there's people from Paisley and Renfrew hating me. But you know what? They're working class, regular communities of interesting, great people. They're great places, got great character, but they are not awash with lots of cash. And so most of my career as a young wine merchant was selling wine through pubs and restaurants to people who said, you know what, I am in the bottom half of the earning population, but I still want to enjoy a decent bottle of wine. And a lot of that is produced using, I think, broadly, relatively sensibly applied policies around, pesticide use and so on. But if you were to just say, it's all got to be organic, I think that you would say to a lot of those people, well, wine's not something you can afford. And, I'd hate to be in that situation.
Right.
Crikey, I was sort of be serious there. Oh, where did that...
Shake it off. Drink some more.
So me down.
Oh, shoot. Well, one of the things that Val and I wanted to ask you about, too, is something that we weren't able to access, which we really want you to talk about. And it's your BBC Celebrity Mastermind experience.
Do you get Mastermind in the United States? Do you have an version?
We can't. And it's funny, I have two friends who are British, and they were here Sunday, and I asked them, they're like, there's a regular BBC Mastermind, right? It's like a game show?
It is. It's a great game show. I'm something of a sort of minor Mastermind nerd. It was invented by the producer, had been jailed or had been held as a prisoner of war in the Second World War by the Nazis, and he'd been interrogated by the SS. And after he came back to the UK, and they were looking for formats for game shows. And this is kind of weird, where do you go? I need a format for a game show. I know. Let me recall my time being interviewed by the SS during the war. But he came up and he said, why didn't we do, if you like, a game show version of being interrogated by the SS? And he said, what do you mean? He said, well, we'll have a single questioner. And so what you have, you have a question master, and normally, or it's the guy called John Humphreys now who does it, and it was before, was a guy called Magnus Magnuson, who are serious figures. They weren't noted for their laughs. And you sit in a black chair with lots of spotlights on you, the sort of spotlight in your face, and out of the dark, this guy hammers questions at you. You get 90 seconds on a specialist subject, and then you get 60 seconds of general knowledge. And the music, it goes da 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 da, and the music title is called Impending Doom. Not a word of a lie. It's called Impending Doom. So you walk up with this music, and my parents were in the audience, and they said they were terrified, and they both have those little Fitbit things, those kind of heart rate monitors.
Yeah.
And my mum said, I wasn't even doing it. She said, as Joe was going up, I looked down at my heart rate monitor, and it was thumping it away at about 140 beats a minute. She was absolutely terrified. So yeah, you go up and you pick your own specialist subject. It can't be something you do as a living. So mine was about the most obscure thing they'd ever had. They said, what's your specialist subject? And I said, it's 2 degrees west, the English meridian. And you kind of have to explain it. On a map, you got, all the lines down. Well, 2 degrees to the west of the Greenwich Meridian, so 2 degrees west, is the line down the United Kingdom that all points are mapped from. And it's the sort of line that most accurately bisects Britain, and it goes right down England. It actually only just touches Scotland very, very briefly, but it goes from Berwick upon Tweed all the way down to Poole in Dorset. And so I answered questions about anywhere that was within 1 kilometre east or west of 2 degrees west. But it covers all sorts of interesting places. I tell you what, it goes through Chance's Glassworks, is in a place called Smethwick in the West Midlands. And Chance's Glassworks made the glass that is still to this day in the White House.
Oh,
wow.
Obscure. There you go.
Totally.
And they made the clock faces on Big Ben. The big clock at the Houses in London. So the glass there and the ornamental glass in the White House comes from the same place. It comes from Chance's Glass Works, and it's on 2 degrees west in Birmingham, just sort of South Birmingham in the Midlands. So it's things like that. It was all these kind of bits. So yeah, we did it. I thought I was going to lose. And one of the other contestants I was on, this is kind of weird story. She was a lovely woman called Michelle Ackley. She's a TV presenter over here, and she used to work on the show. And so before we went on, we had to be escorted to the loo. I should be telling you that Michelle Ackley goes to the loo, but we went to the lavatory, and as we were going there, we were chatting away, and I said, was there anything? I said, what's your specialist subject? She said, I'm doing Columbo, Columbo the TV series.
Yeah.
And I said, do you know who the last ever villain was on Columbo? And she said, I don't. And I said, I'll tell you who it was. It was Matthew Rhys, who's in The Wine Show with me. It's this kind of weird, connection that we came on. He was the last ever villain on Columbo. And I was kind of kicking myself. I thought, crikey, if that's one of your questions and you win it and I lose on that and I've given you the answer. I'll really Anyway, we were chatting away, and I said, when you were making the show, was there any, were there any kind of things that used to happen all the time? Were any sort of little ticks you used to say and see? And she said, yeah, there's this one thing. She said, it's really weird. When we were researchers and producers, we could always predict who was going to win the show. And I said, really? She said, yeah, it was absolutely guaranteed. She said, if a contestant did this, we knew they would be the winner. And so what was the thing? She said, well, they used to come in and you'd see everybody slightly kind of psyching each other out, but you always knew who the winner was, because what they would do is they would go and ask another contestant what their specialist subject was. And when they told them, they would say, and they would ask a question about this other person's specialist subject that even they didn't know, to psych them out.
Oh.
What, you mean a bit like me asking you who the last villain was on Columbo? She said, exactly like you asking me who the last villain was on Columbo. And when we came out, she said, I told you, never fails, because I won the show. And so I won that round, and she said, it's always the guy who goes and does that, who goes and wins the program. So it was really freaky. She said, as soon as you did that, I knew that you were going to go and win. I knew you beat me. And she was really good, actually. I thought she was going to beat me. But on the general knowledge, I kind of ran away with it. But yeah, it's a great show. It's a bit of an English or British TV sort of institution. It's run for years and years. A friend of mine won, actually. He won the regular one. I mean, Celebrity Mastermind is easier. It's not as hard. The general knowledge questions are easier. But my friend Boris Starling, he's called, he's a great novelist. If anybody wants a really good holiday read anything by Boris Starling. He writes thrillers, slightly gory thrillers. And he'd written one when it was years and years ago, about 20 odd years ago. I was staying at his house. I remember being very, very drunk at his house, and him telling me, he said, he'd just written a novel. I was like, yeah, of course you have. And within a year, it had been made into a TV show, and it's called Messiah. It was his first novel. It's really good story. So he'd won. He'd done all sorts of things like Tintin, I think, and the novels of Dick Francis were his specialist subjects.
You've got so much energy, Joe. I don't even know how you keep up with all that, and you keep up. Your social media, first of all, is a riot. You are so much fun to stalk. I mean, follow. And I wanted to ask you, by the way, how that lineup of Covfefe is treating you today.
Absolutely, Covfefe. I just looked at that this morning. I was like, Covfefe. I suspect that is a Greek grape variety. And I could be amazing.
I was like, if I wake up tomorrow and Covfefe is trending, and sure as heck, it was trending before I even went to bed. I was just like, you've got to be kidding me. And then I saw your tweet.
I was like, I am going to go and do a lineup of vintage Covfefe today.
No, this is so crazy. I mean, I just am smiling and shaking my head over here at all of these silly stories and anecdotes. Joe, there isn't a story that you just don't have. Like, it's like out of a bag of tricks you've got.
I had this lovely customer. He's a great guy. Stuart, he's called it. And he was in Fort William, underneath Ben Nevis in the Highlands of Scotland. And he used to do this thing. He said, he's very Scottish. He said, right, if I give you another 50p, will you carry on talking? And he used to talk about like shoving money in the back. And people would come in and he'd say, right, just put some more money and then we'll keep you giving us stories. Do you know that George Washington spent 7% of his annual income on wine? Which roughly today would be about $70,000 equivalent in a year.
So a little bit more than Johnny Depp. And, I understand Thomas Jefferson used to order some Sauterne in cases of wine for him, too, around that time.
He certainly did. And you still every so often see the sort of Jefferson bottles that sort of, and great controversy, wasn't there? The sort of Bill Coke's Jefferson bottles and the sort of controversies around them.
Joe, did there happen to be anything embarrassing at any of that point? Because this is the end of the show where we ask you your most embarrassing wine story.
My most embarrassing wine story, I suspect, actually, this is genuinely a properly embarrassing wine story. My uncle's an admiral, and he had this great sort of party, and I went along, and I don't know, do Americans run around with not very much clothing on at big parties? Like to dress as ladies.
Unless they're very, very drunk and they're like in their 20s.
Well, I'm a member of a very small select group known as the Order of the Leg. Now, a great friend of mine, John T., who'd been an army officer, and whilst he was doing his officer training, he had the most appalling car accident, and he lost his leg. And he now does lots of work, actually, with disabled ex-servicemen, sort of helping people realise that there is a life after amputation, really, is kind of... And he's a para-athlete. In fact, he's the world's first and only para-ice mile swimmer. So he swam a mile in freezing water without a wetsuit on. And he's only got one leg to do it. Great guy, John T. Warnigan. And we had been at this party, and it got very rowdy, and all the sort of grown-ups disappeared. And John T. decided that we would all, rather than decanting wine into a decanter, we would decant it into the empty socket of his false leg. I cannot tell you how utterly revolting it is drinking wine out of the socket of a man's amputated leg. Anyway, the various of us drank this wine, and we had all been in the swimming pool completely naked, sort of larking about, and we were all running around. Johnson's holding this leg, and he's offering this wine in this leg to people. All of us are completely nude, and out of the gloom, my uncle, a rear admiral in the Royal Navy, suddenly appears, and Johnson's like, "Would you like to have a drink of some of this, Admiral?" And I was like, "No, thank you." And we all got falling trouble. So we're all standing there completely stark naked, feeling utterly ashamed, because at that point we all sobered up very, very quickly, because there's an admiral looking at us as we were drinking. So yeah, don't do it, kids. Don't drink wine out of a false leg and offer it to an admiral. It's a very bad idea. Is that embarrassing enough? Because I still am blushing at the memory of it.
Joe, you nailed it. That is the most embarrassing wine story.
Joe, I cannot thank you enough for coming on and sharing all of this with us. I know you've got some family to get to. You haven't been home in some time, and you want to get to drinking and hang out with your lovely fiance. Before we let you go, can you tell our listeners where they can find the Wine Show TV, where they can find you on the social spaces, and anything else you want to say to our listeners?
I will be delighted. States is you can watch Hulu at any time. So you can watch me and the beautiful Matthew Good from Downton Abbey and various other shows, and Matthew Reese from The Americans, who's a great superstar these days, trundling around and enjoying wine. So he has a 13-part series on Hulu. The Wine Show at Wine Show TV is on Twitter and Instagram. And then I'm at Joe Fattorini, Joe with an E, Joe Fattorini, Fattorini. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and all over the place. So I love it if people get in touch, because I sit away chatting whilst I trundle between London and the Yorkshire Dales when I'm on the train, and it keeps me occupied.
Your train updates are awesome as well.
There will be more train updates. Yeah, following other people on the train. They are particularly entertaining. There may well be a train update actually on Friday, because I got to go both ways on the same day. So, and Fridays are good on the train. You get good. You do have to sort of understand the world of Keighley, because I travelled through this place called Keighley, and it's there's a famous quote about Keighley where somebody sort of where weak men die young and the strong the strong envy them their fate. It's not the world's greatest place to go and live. I can say that because I was brought up just outside Keighley. But when you get to Keighley, you get really interesting people who get on the train. So there may well be some updates this Friday. It'll be good fun.
Oh my gosh, Joe. Thank you so very much. Like I said, I know you've got entertaining. It's a little bit late there, so we're going to let you go, and then we'll just wrap up with our Patreon love. But thank you again, and we look forward to seeing the second season of Wine Show TV and hearing your adventures from the train.
Yeah,
I'll come back. We'll do it again.
Yes.
Oh,
okay, good. Yes.
Thank you so much. See you soon.
All right.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Bye.
Bye.
Oh my God, it is a crack up.
I know. He's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And I'm so glad that he took time. Like I said, it's like, what,
How
8
very
o'clock?
generous. I mean, to hear his
I
schedule
know.
makes me look like an amateur. You know, I'm just like, that is exhausting.
Yeah, it's great though. So I'm so glad we got to do that. So we're gonna move on to Patreon love, because honestly, we love having support of our listeners who find value in the content that we deliver, like that amazing chat with Joe Fattorini. I mean, how can you not love that? Thank you so much to our tenacious tasters, Jeff E. from We Like Drinking, Lynn from Savor the Harvest, Sebastian of Sassy Italy Tours, and our It's Not 5 O'Clock and We Don't Care listeners, Meg, Clay, John, Andrew, and Aswani. If you want to jump on the Patreon bandwagon, we would love that, because if you like what you hear and you like spending time with our Wine to Five community, it's like buying us a glass of wine, really, and it's a couple dollars a month. I mean, you can do it for $1 a month. At the $2 a month, we do drawings, which we're going to do right now. We have that's the tastemaker level. So everybody at the $2 a month level and higher every month gets entered into a drawing. So this month we're gonna send out one of our t-shirts.
Yeah, I'm so excited. We're gonna give away t-shirts.
I know, and usually you don't get those until the $20 level, right?
Yeah.
So we're gonna send them out to a lucky Patreon supporter right now. So I've got my little bag. The spit bucket has gone by the wayside, and I've got here.
Who is it?
Lynn.
Lynn's gonna have so many goodies when we find her and give her a giant hug in Portland.
Yeah, she's coming to the Society of Wine Educator Conference. How exciting is that?
I know. And she's going to get the Govino glasses. She's going to get a bottle of Albarello soap. And she's going to get a t-shirt. So we definitely will let Lynn know that she won and what t-shirt size she needs. So definitely, you guys, it pays off to be a Patreon. You get all sorts of goodies. And look at this content. I mean, the interview with Joe Fattorini, this is the reason why we do this, and this is the reason why we need your support. So just as a reminder of, Val and I persist to bring on these incredible celebrities. He is a mastermind of storytelling, obviously. So
it's taken us, 6 months to finally work around that crazy schedule and all that, but we're so lucky to have brought that. So guys, we...
It's crazy. We're just shaking our heads and smiling with your cheeks hurting the whole time with that great interview. But we wanted to thank everybody for being a part of this community. You can join our Facebook private page. So that's the Wine25 community. And we can talk some more about the shows, about books, about wine with whatever else is in it, cocktails. So please continue to show your friends how to subscribe and how to listen, and tweet it, Facebook it, do whatever you can to share it, please. And also, if you guys want to ask us a question, you can do that on our SpeakPipe, and we do have links to that in all the show notes. It's also very easy to find on our website. And we do have a Wine25 store for a lot of the material that we talk about, wine, books, accessories. So feel free to shop this summer, shop whenever for holidays, and join us on all the different platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, YouTube, Google+. You can find Val on Twitter at WineGalUnboxed and as Vino with Val on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. I am on Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest as The Wine Heroine, and you can also find me on Facebook. A lot of people have been finding me on Facebook. That's great. And connect with Joe. We told you how to do that, so he's all over the place. Totally fun to follow. But until next week with more fun stuff, Val, I don't know. That was pretty great. The embarrassing wine story. Cheers to Joe.
Cheers to all you guys listening.
Thank you for listening to the Wine to 5 podcast. Be sure to check us out at Facebook/WineTWO5 and tune in next week for more fun and useful sip tips.